periodically something happens or a coincidence of events happen that cause evolution to change to revolution. And we believe that in the tax arena, the US tax arena particularly, we are in such a period. The IRS estimate that there are 7 million Americans living outside of its border. Of those 7 million, they estimate that more than 6.5 million of them don't file annual tax returns. That position, obviously, for any economy at this point, for any economy particularly looking to raise revenues, is a very attractive one. And the IRS have been focusing on how to actually get access, because there is a problem. Although they know that these people exist, they know they're out there, they don't know who they are, they don't know where they are. So essentially, 7% compliance of that community. In the last decade, we have seen the advent of whistleblowers in the tax arena, some more famous than others. Bradley Birkenfeld, in 2007, walked out of UBS with a list of accounts and US account holders and presented it to the Department of Justice. And that started a new ball rolling. The next move that was made was the opening of a window of opportunity for people to come forward. In 2009, we saw a voluntary disclosure program that invited people to disclose their hidden assets. And it offered them protection from criminal prosecution, and it offered them limited penalties of around 20% of the highest asset value. For its part, the IRS expected obviously to generate revenues, but additionally, and as importantly, it expected to actually generate an awful lot of information about the people who had helped and facilitated this community to hide their assets in the first place. So apart from putting their affairs in order, everyone who went through that process was interviewed, to some degree interrogated, as to who were their bankers, who were their lawyers, who helped them set up the structures. And the IRS have put together a significant amount of data as to really who aided, who abetted. 15,000 people took advantage of that process, and I since think there have been around about another 3,000, which in real terms is a drop in the bucket compared to the 6.5 million who are out there. But nonetheless, it is a result. It did generate information, it did generate revenues. The question then is, having seen the power and tasted the value of having real information, how does one accelerate that process? Waiting for whistleblowers, waiting for the next guy to become disgruntled and walk out with information is very slow, and it's incredibly unreliable. The US government became creative and invented something called FATCA, the Foreign Account Tax Compliant Act, which was signed into law about a year ago. FATCA, in essence, my colleagues are going to explain in more detail what it's about, but FATCA says from January 2013, we will withhold 30% of all payments coming out of the US unless you comply with certain requirements, which are essentially identify the US accounts that you hold, identify the US account holders, and tell us about it. So it is a system, basically, of institutionalized global whistleblowing. This is really where evolution turns to revolution, because the amount of information that can and could be generated by this system as it is being implemented could really change and make a very, very significant dent in the lives of many millions of US citizens. Essentially, the financial community are currently working to figure out how are we going to identify our US accounts, how are we going to identify the US account holders, and how do we go about reporting them to the IRS. So the IRS have managed, in a very elegant move, to hire in excess of 1 million people to track down their non-compliant taxpayers. Very recently, during the last few weeks in fact, a new voluntary program has been announced in order to give protection from prosecution to people who come forward before FATCA finds them. The IRS have repeatedly said that they distinguish very much between people who voluntarily disclose and those who they catch. And there is mounting evidence that this is true. Weekly, we see new cases of prosecution with fines and penalties running into the millions for people that have been caught by the system rather than disclosed within a program. Doug Shulman, who is the Commissioner of the IRS, has been actually quite vocal of late and has declared that if you are a US individual holding overseas assets, you must report them and pay taxes, or we will be increasingly focused on finding you. He has further said that the IRS has been mining and scouring data from the previous disclosure programs as well as the various other bits of information that have come to their attention and has identified numerous banks, advisors, promoters in foreign countries that may have helped US taxpayers to hide and park assets offshore. There is very clearly now a mechanism in which these words can and will be translated into action. The last time there was a voluntary disclosure program, and in fact the time before that, and there's been a voluntary disclosure process forever. Darlene will tell me exactly when, I'm sure, but a very, very long time. And last time it was labelled your last chance to come clean. Now, the problem was that if you chose not to, there was really nothing too much that anyone could do to find you. You were still obscure in the world somewhere. This time, there is in fact an enormous mechanism, which is the world's financial institutions, that will be looking. And so when Mr. Shulman says this is your last and your best chance, I'm inclined to believe it. I think this time there is teeth to this that can go an awful long way.